Okay. All right, so good evening. Welcome to Genesis, and we're beginning with chapter 42 tonight. Hopefully, we will be covering quite a bit of ground as we attempt to finish Genesis by tomorrow night. So, just as a way of reminding us, remember, of course, that Joseph had been in prison. He was called up to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. So Pharaoh put him in charge over the land, 7 years of plenty, and now we're in the midst of 7 years of famine. And with chapter 42, we're finally going to read about the brothers coming down to Egypt and Joseph seeing them for the first time in 22 years. So, Blake, would you go ahead and read for us verses 1 through 5?
Yes. When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And then he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might come to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine in the land of Canaan was severe.
Okay. So I love verse 1. Why do you look at one another? It's like Jacob's like, do I have to think of everything? Come on, we got no food. Go down to Egypt. And you can tell, though, from that statement that there's just like some friction, isn't there, between Jacob and his sons. And then we're told in verse 3 that 10 of the brothers go, and the one that doesn't go is Benjamin, because Jacob fears that some harm could befall him. Isn't that interesting? What do you suppose? Well, let me ask it this way. What is Jacob maybe concerned about? Yeah.
With his other sons?
And which makes you wonder if he's a little bit suspicious of the other sons, if in fact Joseph really was killed by this wild animal, or whether they were somehow involved. And he's like, no, I'm not sending Benjamin with these guys. Yeah. Okay, let's read verses 6 through 17. Luke.
Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them and said to them, "You are spies, you have come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said to him, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons, we are honest men, your servants are not spies." But he said to them, "No, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the son of one man in the land of Canaan, and in fact the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, it is as I spoke to you, saying, "You are spies. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh surely you are spies." So he put them all together in prison 3 days.
Thanks, Luke. So what do you think of Joseph's reaction here when he realizes it's his brothers before him?
He's probably thinking it's time for sweet justice.
We're told he spoke roughly to them, right? And we have 3 times, one of our key words here, that Joseph recognized them. And then we're told in verse 8, he recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. So remember, this is the same word we've been following through the stories of the goats and the garments. Here there's no goat or garment, but this theme of recognizing and not recognizing is present. And so perhaps this theme of deception could be suggested here, because they don't know who Joseph is, and he's not about to reveal his identity just yet, but he knows who they are. Why do you suppose they don't recognize him?
He looks like an Egyptian now.
Okay, he's dressed up like an Egyptian official, so he'd be clean shaven, he'd have on all the Egyptian garb. And what else is he doing? Now, we haven't read it yet, but in a few verses we'll see that something else is going on.
He's not.
That's right. He's not speaking to them personally. He's speaking through an interpreter, right? And also, it's been 22 years, and Joseph was the youngest, so he would have changed quite a bit anyway, especially being dressed up like an Egyptian ruler. So we're told specifically in verse 9 that Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them. And as we're told that, the next thing we read is that he accuses them of being spies. So he remembers the dreams, and then these words come out of his mouth: "You're spies. You know, you've come to spy out the land." What's his motivation there? Why is he reacting in this way? No thoughts at all?
Maybe he's trying to turn up the heat on them a little bit, see if that's really the reason why they're there, see if there's any other hidden motives with them.
Okay, that's good. He knows these guys aren't always what they appear to be, and so turn up the heat a little bit and let's see if they crack. Let's see if they spill something that we haven't heard about to this point. The other thing that it causes them to do is to begin to tell him who they are, right? Now, why else might he be suspicious of these brothers, especially after they describe who they are? Look at verse 13.
Because it says, they say that Joseph's dead, basically.
Yeah, that Joseph's dead, which, as far as they know, he might be, but there's something else too.
Is it because he wants to know where Benjamin is?
Yeah, I think so. He knows what they did to him. Benjamin's the only other son of Rachel, and suspiciously, Benjamin isn't with them. Oh, well, we're 12 brothers. One is no more. The other one's with his father. And Joseph's thinking, yeah, right, I'll bet he is. And so he jumps right back at them and says, "It is as I spoke to you. You are spies." So what's the little test that he originally plans for them here? What does he do?
He wants the youngest brother to come.
Yeah, he wants the youngest brother to come down, and what's his plan at this point? Yeah, he's only going to send one back and keep the rest in prison. Now, of course, we're going to see in the next few verses that Joseph changes his mind. Any idea why he changes his mind? Well, if he sends one, now he takes 3 days to calm down, right? He keeps them in prison for 3 days. So we could say maybe he calmed down a little bit and thought it through a little more. But if he only sends one brother back, he can only send a very limited amount of food with one brother, not enough to feed an entire family. So perhaps he thinks through this and decides to send all but one of the brothers back. Okay, so that brings us to the brothers' second audience with Joseph then in verses 18 through 26.
On the third day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring back your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. Reuben replied, Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them, since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep. But they came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound for quarter hours. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left.
Okay, so Joseph says that he fears God, which is true, and changes the plan to have all of them return except for one. And of course, he gives them the command, don't return without your youngest brother. Now, what's involved here with the idea of leaving one brother behind?
We're going to have to make the choice.
Yeah, they're going to have to make a choice. They're either going to have to come back if they're loyal to that brother, or they're just going to have to abandon that brother. Joseph knows what it's like to be abandoned by his brothers. So again, it's a bit of a test, although eventually, because the famine's so severe, they're not going to have any choice but to return anyway. Then, of course, they have this interesting conversation, and how ironic that Joseph gets to overhear it, right? So all of these years, 22 years, they've been carrying this guilt. Because when something bad happens to them, it's like, uh-oh, God's getting even with us. We knew we shouldn't have done this, you know? This is the first thing that comes to their mind. So Joseph learns something here that he wouldn't have known before. What is that? Yeah, that Reuben tried to save him, right. So that's interesting news for Joseph. So when he decides to hold on to one of the brothers, which one does he choose? Simeon, and who is Simeon? In the line of children. Second born. Why didn't he choose Reuben? The firstborn, which would seem like the obvious choice. What had he just learned?
He just found out that he tried to save him.
He just found out that Reuben tried to save him. So, yeah, rather than treat him badly, he takes son number 2, right? And he binds Simeon. Okay, so Joseph then gives them food, but not only food, what else does he give them? Gives them all their money back, which is going to freak them out as they depart and go home. Okay, anything else so far in the story that I haven't covered, maybe you wanted to ask about or make a comment on? All right, let's read 27 through 38. Brothers return to Canaan.
So as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey the empty encampment, he saw his money. There it was in the mouth of the sack. So he said to his brothers, My money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, What is this that God has done to us? Then they went to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, and told him all that had happened to them, saying, The man who was Lord of the land spoke roughly to us, and took us for spies of the country. But we said to him, We are honest men, we are not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, By this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me, take food for the famine of your households, and be gone, and bring your youngest brother to me, so I shall know that you are not spies, that you are honest men. I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade in. Then it happened as they emptied their sacks that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob said, Their father said to them, You have bereaved me, Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and you want to take vengeance, all these sons are against me. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hand, and I will bring him back to you. But he said, My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. if any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow.
Okay, good. So the brothers return, and in their stop along the way, only one of them opens his sack. And of course, he finds the silver there. What's their immediate reaction to this?
I mean, grieved.
They're grieved. It says their hearts, their hearts failed them, or literally their hearts went out, and they were afraid. And then they say what? Yeah, what is this that God has done to us? There's our Genesis question, by the way, right? What is this that you have done? Here it's what has God done to us? This is the thing about sin in our lives, especially even though the brothers had time to ponder this sin and decide to do what they did to Joseph, it was still an act of passion because of their intense hatred for him. They hated Joseph so much that they wanted to get rid of him. But he's been with them for the last 22 years in the form of a guilty conscience. And now that these things are happening to them, it's the first thing they think of. You know, oh, what we did to our brother, we're guilty, and God's trying to get even with us. And so it really shows just how terrible sin can be. You know, it's something that you can't undo. It's with you for the rest of your life, in one sense. Unless you're a believer, obviously you can be forgiven of it. You can repent, you can be forgiven of it, you can be set free from it. But still, as human beings, there's always that knowledge in our brain that we remember that we did such and such a thing. And this is one of the consequences of sin. So you can be forgiven of sin, but you're still going to experience consequences from that sin. That's just the nature of sin. And of course, the brothers at this point haven't really been repentant because they've never been honest about what they've done. And so this sin continues to haunt them. So they get back to their father and they recount the story. And what do you think of their retelling of the story? Is it accurate? What did they leave out, Skylar?
Well, because first Joseph said that he was going to do that.
Yeah, so they left a few things out. They did say that the man of the land spoke harshly to us, right? But they didn't mention anything about being thrown in prison. So no mention of being imprisoned for 3 days. No mention of Simeon being in custody. If you look at the way they word it, it's almost like the man just wanted Simeon to hang out with him or something, you know? So what they try to do is soften the blow to Jacob of what they went through. And then there's no mention of Joseph's death threat. And they add the phrase trade in the land as if, you know, look, things went pretty well. We're invited to trade in the land. You know, if you come back, I'll grant you your brother and you can trade in the land. So what is Jacob's reaction to all of this?
He's not happy. He's just like, it almost sounds like he's whining because he's like, everything's going wrong. First this, now that, then this.
Yeah.
He's like kind of saying, like, I'm gonna die if this isn't resolved, basically.
Yeah.
He keeps talking about that for a while.
Yeah, so I mean, he has had a lot of hardship, but it does sound kind of whiny, doesn't it? In verse 39. Now, something else happened before we hear Jacob's response. What was that? So the brothers recounted their trip. And then what happened?
The open sacks.
He opened the sacks, and everyone had their money, not just one brother. Simeon's missing, and everyone has their money.
Shady.
It's looking shady. I'm telling you.
Ice went down.
It's looking like they deceived the Egyptians and stole their money back, maybe sold their brother to get money back. Who knows? But it doesn't look good in Jacob's eyes. So yeah, he whines a bit in verse 36, and I guess we can't totally fault him for that, although it's not the most attractive feature. So there's a response by one of the sons, Reuben. What does Reuben say? Again, trying to act as the responsible one, the firstborn. Luke, what does Reuben say?
Just that it sort of count his two sons as sort of substitute if anything goes wrong.
Yeah, if I don't bring Benjamin back, you can kill my two sons. What do you think of that offer?
Not a while.
Not a wise offer. Look, Dad, if I don't bring Benjamin back, you can kill two more of your grandsons. I don't think that's a good trade-off, So we see Reuben again trying to assert leadership in the family, but not making a really good go of it, It's not a good offer. Okay, anything else in chapter 42? All right, so we move on to chapter 43, the brothers' second trip now down to Egypt, verses 1 through 14.
But the famine continued to ravage the land of Canaan. When the grain they had brought from Egypt was almost gone, Jacob said to his sons, "Go back and buy us a little more food." But Judah said, "The man was serious when he warned us. You won't see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you send Benjamin with us, we will go down and buy more food. But if you don't let Benjamin go, we won't go either." Remember, the man said, "You won't see my face again unless your brother is with you." "Why were you so cruel to me?" Jacob moaned. "Why did you tell him you had another brother?" "The man kept asking us questions about our family," they replied. He asked, "Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother?" So we answered his questions. How could we know he would say, "Bring your brother down here"? Judah said to his father, "Send the boy with me, and we will be on our way. Otherwise, we will all die of starvation. And not only we, but you and our little ones. I personally guarantee his safety. You may hold me responsible if I don't bring him back to you. Then let me bear the blame forever. If we hadn't wasted all this time, we could have gone and returned twice by now." So their father Jacob finally said to them, "If it can't be avoided, then at least do this. Pack your bags with the best products of this land. Take them down to the man as gifts: balm, honey, gum, aromatic resin, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Also take double the money that was put back in your sacks, as it was probably someone's mistake. Then take your brother and go back to the man. May God Almighty give you mercy as you go before the man, so that he will release Simeon and let Benjamin return. But if I must lose my children, so be it."
Okay. So we're told in verse 1, the famine was severe in the land, and we remember they're only 2 years into it, so there's another 5 years of famine left. Maybe the brothers would have forsaken Simeon if the famine had ended, right? Because they're in no hurry to go back, and Jacob is certainly not in a hurry because he doesn't want them to take Benjamin. But I love Jacob in verse 2. He's like they didn't have this previous conversation. Well, go back down and buy us some food in Egypt. And they're like, "We have to take Benjamin." In fact, who's the one that speaks up? Judah speaks up. And so this is the beginning of where we see him asserting his leadership role in the family. And his leadership role is going to be much more effective than the role that Reuben tried to play. So he reminds his father that they cannot see the man's face unless they bring their brother. And what does Jacob respond to this? I love it. It's very realistic.
He says, take a bunch of presents down.
Way back before then. Yeah, like verse 6.
He's wondering why they spilled the beans about the other brother.
Yeah. Why'd you treat me so bad by telling him that you had another brother? We actually get some information here that we didn't have in the previous chapter. And that is when Joseph accused them of being spies, this was the pretense that then allowed him to inquire about their family. So they didn't just blurt out, oh, well, we're all, 12 sons of one father, blah, blah, blah. But they say here that he questioned us specifically about our family. And we can see Joseph's interest here. Verse 7, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? These are things that he really wanted to know the answers to. And, then they're like, could we possibly have known that he would have said, bring your brother down? It's like, get real, Dad. We're just answering the guy's questions. So Judah then makes an offer, and it's a more effective offer than the one that Reuben made. What does Judah say?
He said he'll basically be responsible if anyone comes back.
Yeah, as I have actually up here on the slide, Judah offers himself, not his sons. He says that he will be the guarantee, and that if he doesn't bring Benjamin back, may he bear the blame forever. So that's much more effective. He's not saying you can kill my children, your grandchildren, or anything. He's just laying his own life on the line and his own position in the family on the line by promising his father that he would bring Benjamin back safely. And then we see in verse 10 that actually they had stalled for a long time because Judah says, for if we had not lingered, surely by now we would have returned this second time. And so now, Blake, Jacob's response, what you said, well, then let's take a present down to the man, try to make as good a presentation as possible. Not only do they take a gift, but what else do they take? They take the money back, right? And Jacob says, maybe it was an oversight. And then in verse 14, he says, may God Almighty, El Shaddai, right, give you mercy before the man, that he may release your other brother and Benjamin. And if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. It's like, well, I got no other choice. We're all going to die otherwise. So what do you make of Jacob's response here about, well, if I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved? What does he seem to be forgetting?
God's promise.
Yeah, how about all the promises of God to turn him into a great nation and make his descendants, like the dust of the ground and the stars of the heavens. And he's seen in the past how God has been with him and delivered him from Laban, from Esau, from the people who could have attacked him after his sons attacked Shechem. So he's seen throughout his life God protect him. But he's so overwhelmed with the grief of losing Joseph and thinking that Joseph is dead that it appears as though he's totally forgotten about God's care for him and his family. And everything that's going on here, it's sort of the way we would act without believing in God. It's whining, complaining how bad things are, putting things off that we really don't want to do. And when we have to do it, it's like, well, if I die, I die, but I guess I have to do it. So it's that sort of response. We're not seeing the faith in God, although he does in verse 14 say, may God Almighty give you mercy before the man. So he does call out on God for his help here. Okay, anything else in these verses? All right, so in 15 through 23, we read about the brothers returning to Egypt.
So the men took that present and Benjamin, and they took double money in their hand and arose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, "Take these men to my home and slaughter an animal and make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon." Then the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. Now the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, "It is because of the money which was returned in our sacks the first time that we are brought in, so that he may make a case against us and seize us to take us as slaves with our donkeys." When they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house and said, "Oh, sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it happened when we came to the encampment that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it back in our hand. And we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks." But he said, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them.
Okay. So they return, and I guess they're waiting in the queue to be able to speak to Joseph, but Joseph spies them and tells his servant to take them to his house. So obviously, Joseph wants a more intimate interview, but he's also going to bless them with a good meal and all that. But how do the brothers respond? Yeah, they're frightened. This is very unusual. You know, they expected to meet him in similar circumstances that they had the first time, but he's inviting them to his house. So this is a royal house. Men like this aren't used to walking into a house of royalty, you know, even though their father's very well-off man, powerful man, but not in the same vein, of course, as Joseph is. So we're told that they're afraid. And what do they think the problem is as to why they're being brought to Joseph's house?
Because of the silver that they found in their bag.
It's because of what?
Because of the silver that they found in their bags.
Yeah, they think they're being called down for stealing the silver. And so one of them intercepts the servant at the door and tries to explain the whole story. And what does the servant say? Yeah, he said, well, and even before that, a really significant statement, your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. Wow. In other words, God is watching out for you. And then he said, I had your money. So in other words, I know why the money ended up back in your sack, right? Because I was responsible for it. Then we're told he brought Simeon out to them. Simeon must have been very happy to finally see his brothers after who knows how long it's been since they last left him there. Now, when the servant responds to the brothers, he says, peace be with you. Do not be afraid. And the word peace is going to occur here 3 times in the story, here in verse 23 and twice more in verse 27. And if you'll remember, one of the themes that we said that has been with us really ever since the Jacob story is this theme of conflict and this need for peace because of the constant conflict among family members. And as we begin to approach the reconciliation of Joseph and his brothers, we're going to see finally all of this conflict is going to be resolved and peace is going to be restored to the household. Okay, you guys ready to move on? So verses 24 to 34.
And when the man had brought the men into Joseph's house and given them water, and they had washed their feet, and when he had given their donkeys fodder, they prepared the present for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they should eat bread there. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present that they had with them, and bowed down to him to the ground. And he inquired about their welfare and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. And he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brothers, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and controlling himself, he said, "Serve the food." They served him by himself, and then by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in amazement. Portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And they drank and were merry with him.
Okay, thanks. So they bring the men in, they get prepared for the meal. They present their gift to Joseph in verse 26, and we're told that they all bowed down before him to the earth. Now, the first time they bowed down, it said that Joseph remembered his dream. But remember, in that first dream, there were 11 sheaves bowing down to him. And there were only 10 brothers at that point bowing down to him. So here we actually have the fulfillment of that first dream where all of the brothers bow down before him. So he asks about his father. Of course, he doesn't call him that, but is the old man of whom you spoke of still alive? And very respectfully, they respond, he is. And then verse 29, the camera just stops for a moment and zooms in as it looks at Joseph's eyes meeting his brother and seeing him for the first time in 22 years. The only full-blooded brother, right, that Joseph has, which is Benjamin. And tell me about Joseph's response here.
He's overcome with compassion.
Yeah. Have we seen Joseph cry before? First meeting with the brothers, right? This is very emotional for Joseph. And so he has to get out of there, right? Verse 30, it says Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. Okay, he can't break down in front of them. Not yet, it would ruin who he really is. And so he washed his face and he came out and he restrained himself and then served food. So I'm not sure why we're told this, except maybe to note Egyptian customs, but we're told that the Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians, which is kind of funny when you consider later on in the law of Moses how the Jews wouldn't eat with Gentiles because of fear of, being contaminated. But here it's the Egyptians that won't eat with the Hebrews. So Joseph does something else that really astounds them. And what's that?
He seats them at the table.
Yeah. And so they're just kind of like looking around at each other in astonishment. They must have been like, what in the world? Now, why do you suppose Joseph does that?
I think it might have just been natural to him. He was just like, oh yeah, but that's how they sit. Like he might not have even thought about it.
Yeah, maybe.
think it's going to freak them out a bit.
Yeah, it's dropping a subtle hint, isn't it, that at who he is, but more than that, it might have caused them to think this man has knowledge of us that we don't know about, or where he gets it. Because in the next story, he's going to tell them, you know, how did you think you could pull this act of stealing my cup over on me? Don't you know that I'm a man with knowledge? You know, I can divine things. So maybe this is a little pre-taste of that idea. And we do have the word peace 2 more times, as I'd mentioned in verse 27. In our translations, we can miss this because usually uses the word well. He asked about their well-being, but literally he asked about their peace. And he said, is your father peace, you know, well? So that's the 2 occurrences there in verse 27. Now, one of the other things that Joseph does is he gives Benjamin 5 times as much as he gives the other brothers. Why do you suppose he does that? I can think of a few reasons, at least 2.
Well, he's the only full brother, so he's probably loving this guy. It's the first chance he's ever had to really, in a long time, love this guy.
Yeah, so he just overcome with joy at seeing him and emotion, and he wants to give him all that he can.
Yeah.
So that could be one thing. Yeah.
Could it be that he kind of suspects that the brothers don't like him? He's now the youngest.
Right. So maybe he wants to see how the other brothers are going to react to Benjamin getting extra. Will they be envious of Benjamin? Will they treat him badly? So it could also be a test. That's right. Okay, great. Anything else in chapter 43? See, we're moving along pretty good here with these chapters.
Do you think Simeon was in jail the whole time? Or
Apparently he was, but
speculation, I guess.
my guess would be that he probably wasn't too harshly treated. I'm sure Joseph saw to it that he was treated all right. Yeah. But Joseph, you know, didn't reveal his identity to Simeon. And so if he had treated him too good, Simeon might have been wondering what was going on. He obviously couldn't have had a lot of contact with Simeon. So the supposition would be that he was probably in prison. Might have been the prison that Joseph was in. Who knows? That would have been poetic justice. Yeah. Okay, good. Anything else?
What was the age difference between Benjamin and Joseph?
Oh, good question. Let's see. Benjamin is born on the return trip of Jacob. And so Joseph is born, I think from what I've read, they think he's born in that first 7-year period when Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah are having all the kids, and then finally Rachel does. So that would mean, if that's the case, Joseph was 13 when they left to come back to Canaan. And then they stopped in Sukkot for a while. Remember, Jacob built a house. And then they went to Shechem. They were there for a while. And it was only after what happens in Shechem that God appears to him and says, go to Bethel. And he goes there. And then after they leave Bethel, so who knows how many years are involved there. But, you know, we could say that it's unlikely that Joseph is more than 17, because we do know at 17 he's going to be taken away. So what would that put Benjamin at then? You know, maybe he's 4 or 5 or something like that. And that's just me roughly thinking in my head. I haven't, you know, tried to dig this out of the book of Genesis to get the exact chronology, but something like that. Yeah. Okay, well, good. Let's pause and take our first break, and we'll come back for chapter 44. All right, so chapter 44 we label this the final test because here is where Joseph really puts the pressure on the brothers to figure out exactly who they are and whether they're still the same or whether they've changed. So let's read 1 through 13, which gives us the test that Joseph puts the brothers through. Whose turn? Is it yours, Luke? I think so.
Then he commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. Also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain. So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. When they had gone out of the city, and were not yet far off, Joseph said to his steward, get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks, and with which he indeed practices divination? You have done evil in so doing. So he overtook them, and he spoke to them these same words. And they said to him, why does my Lord say these words? Far be it from us that your servant should do such a thing. Look, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks. And then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? With whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves. And he said, now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and shall be blameless. And each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack. So he searched, he began with the oldest and left off the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city.
All right. So one more test Joseph has devised, and that is to take a favorite silver cup of his and put it in the sack of Benjamin. I'm just thinking in verse 3, as soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. How good they must have felt at this point. You know, oh, wow, a successful trip. We got Simeon back. We still have Benjamin. We've got all this food to take back. And the guy treated us great, man. We got to eat in his house and everything. And then to get stopped by the steward just a little ways out of town and to have this happen. What a nightmare for them, huh? So why does, what is the test here? Because when the steward says, you know, somebody's stolen the cup, what are the conditions that he places on the one that he finds the cup with? Yeah. So they say, what do the brothers say? Their judgment is actually much harsher. We'll all be your slaves. And what will happen to the one who has the cup? He'll die. Yeah, right. But the servant is much more just, shall we say? He says, no. He said, only the one with whom I find the cup will be my slave. Why do you suppose he says that?
I think he only wants Benjamin at this point. For
So,
the test.
Yeah, he knows the cup is in Benjamin's sack, and so the test is what? Yeah, to see if they'll ditch Benjamin the way they ditched Joseph, right? Save their own skin in order to protect themselves. So I've got here that there's some interesting similarities with the pursuit by Laban. You remember when Laban chased after Jacob, and we had the stolen household gods, right? So first of all, the word searched. Remember how it said that Laban searched the tents of the different people. And in that story, we said this is the same word as the word felt in the story of Jacob, in Isaac, when Isaac felt Jacob's hands. So the steward here, the servant, is doing the same thing. He's feeling around in the sacks, looking to see where the cup might be. Both searches were for something valuable from the person. and were believed to have supernatural power attached to them. So tell me a little bit, what is this cup that Joseph has placed in Benjamin's sack?
Supposed to be used for divination.
A divination cup. And we talked a little bit about that one night last week. Do you remember? We talked about different ways that divination could be done in the ancient world. You remember?
This one's not using it, but
Sorry?
not using it at this time.
Yeah.
Maybe tea leaves, like reading the gunk at the bottom of the cup.
Yeah, exactly. The same kind of thing, I suppose. So putting liquid in the cup and maybe oil then, and seeing what sorts of patterns emerged. And from that, there was some interpretation attached to it. Now, we don't know that Joseph really did this, but he wants his brothers to think that this cup is special to him for that reason. Besides the fact that it's also a silver cup, so it would obviously be worth money. A third similarity is that Jacob had pronounced a death sentence on whoever had the stolen property, and the brothers do the same thing here. I wonder if you find it as interesting as I do that so many of these stories in Genesis recall former stories in Genesis. I don't know if you've ever seen some of these parallels before. Just get your thoughts. Is this new to you? Even if it's not new, what do you think about these various similarities that we've seen as we've gone through the book? And again, what's the significance of it?
It's new to me.
It's new to you, Blake. Anyone else? New, you've seen it before. Maybe you've seen some before, but maybe not as many as we pointed out. Or
I feel like I haven't paid attention enough to it, or like seen a book from a bird's eye view enough to see like, oh look, that's the same as there. So it's
Yeah.
like going through small sections.
that's a great point, Kristen, and that's one of my hopes in doing this, is that it gets us to pay more attention to the details in the story and to begin to ask ourselves, now, as I read this story, does it ring a bell with some other story, either in the same book or maybe in a future book of the Bible, another book of the Bible? And again, the purpose for seeing similarities in the stories and sometimes contrasts is what?
It helps us pick up what's significant in each story. What's the main lesson we're supposed to learn from each one?
Exactly. What are we supposed to learn from it? And by comparing the stories, oftentimes we can see certain themes that are important. If they're the same, sometimes there's contrasts which also help us then to interpret each story. And so what we're doing, remember guys, I'll say it one more time, is that we're allowing the Bible to interpret the Bible. So it's a very, I think it's a very useful thing. It's typology again. It's what we call typology, and that's what's happening. And then the last one is actually a contrast between the previous story. Rachel is not caught, although she's guilty, whereas Benjamin is caught, even though he's innocent. So it's kind of ironic. So you'll notice that first of all, there's a little bit of suspense because they start with the oldest brother and they work their way down to the youngest brother, right? And of course, we all know that it's in the youngest brother's sack, and so does the steward. But it creates a lot of suspense as each sack is open. And probably by the time they're getting to the last one or two, they're thinking, oh, we're going to make it, it's not in anybody's sack. But no, lo and behold, it's in Benjamin's. So all of the brothers were told, tear their clothes. Verse 13, each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. So they didn't have to go back. Joseph's steward was willing to let the others go. But this is a good sign in that they're not going to leave without Benjamin. So they all return. Okay, any other thoughts or questions in the first 13 verses? Okay, verses 14 through 17, the brothers appear before Joseph.
Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in, and they threw themselves to the ground before him. Joseph said to them, "What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find out things by divination? What can we say to my lord?" Judah replied. "What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my lord's slaves, we ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup." But Joseph said, "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who is found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace."
Okay. So it's interesting in verse 14 that it doesn't just begin, "and the brothers came to Joseph's house," but Judah and his brothers, which again identifies Judah stepping forward as the leader. In verse 15, Joseph said to them, here again is our favorite question, "What deed is this that you have done?" Right? And I like his second question, "Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination?" You know, are we to take Joseph seriously here?
No, I feel like he's just like building up a personality to kind of like scare them all the time. It's like, oh, look at me. Like,
Yeah.
this big shot.
Yeah. I mean, this is a divination cup, right? But he didn't use divination. He used trickery to put the cup in Benjamin's sack. He knew it was there all along. But yeah, I think you're right. He wants to build up this mystique and create a fear in them. Again, to put pressure on them and to see how they respond. And having sat all the brothers in order, maybe that flashes back to them and they're like, wow, this guy really does have supernatural knowledge that, you know, we don't know where he gets it. Maybe it's from the cup. It's not. Okay, so in 16, Judah speaks up, "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves?" Okay, all rhetorical questions. In other words, we have no defense. Now, what do you think of this statement? "God has found out the iniquity of your servants." Just talk to me a little bit about what that statement means here.
Let's bring back to the initial, like, telling Joseph to Egypt rather than things just happening.
Okay, yeah, so Judah is confessing their real guilt, right? What they had done to Joseph. But he makes it sound like he's confessing the guilt that they stole the cup, because he doesn't think that the Egyptian Lord would know anything about that event. So there's actually a dual intended meaning here. But Joseph knows what's going on because he planted the cup. So he says, "We are my Lord's slaves, both we and he also with whom the cup was found." So Judah emphasizes the solidarity of the brothers, that they will all stay and be slaves. And just think, if this had not really been Joseph, or if this had been an unjust person, the devastation this would have caused to Jacob's family, because they would have all starved to death back in Canaan. All of the wives and the children, Jacob himself. If the brothers don't return with provisions, then the family's doomed, right? So it's a very desperate situation. But Joseph responds, puts the pressure on again. "Far be it from me that I should do so. I'm only going to keep the guy who stole the cup. The rest of you guys," I like this line, "go back up to your father in peace." Now, how in the world could they possibly go to their father in peace if they don't take Benjamin, right? We all know that's an impossibility. All right. So important words in this part of the story. The word "found" keeps occurring over and over again. The finding of the cup, for instance, finding out of the guilt of your servants, as Judah confesses. So the cup is found, the guilt is found out, although it's really not about the cup, it's about what happened 22 years earlier. And as we've noticed, the word peace occurring again here in verse 17, and a key word in the story that we continue to see flow through the various chapters here. Any other thoughts or questions on these verses, 14 through 17, Judah's words? Okay, so we come to a very significant passage now with verse 18. And this is Judah's passionate plea, and it is the longest speech in Genesis. Okay, so that shows how significant it is. And I'm going to give you a preview so that as we read through the story, maybe some of these words will jump out at you. Father is a key word in the speech. It occurs 15 times. So as Judah speaks to Joseph, uppermost on his mind is the well-being of his father. Throughout the speech, Judah is very respectful. The brothers and Jacob are called your servants 10 times. And the opposite of that is true. Joseph is called my Lord 7 times. And here we go again with another question. Can you think of any other speech in Genesis of one brother to another where he constantly refers to himself as your servant and calls his brother my Lord? Which one? Jacob and Esau, when Jacob returned to the land. So we see a similar dynamic here. And if you'll remember, in that story, reconciliation was the result, because Jacob humbled himself before his brother Esau. Here, these brothers are obviously in a very humbled position, and it's ultimately going to result then in their reconciliation with Joseph. Okay, so let's go ahead and read verses 18 through 34. I think so.
Then Judah came near to him and said, "O my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing, and do not let your anger burn against your servant. You are even like Pharaoh." My Lord asked his servant, saying, "Have you a father or brother?" And he said to my Lord, "We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, who is young. His brother is dead, and he is alone. And he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him." Then he said to your servants, "Bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him." And he said to my Lord, "The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die." But you said to your servants, "Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more." So it was when we went up to your servant, my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, "Go back and buy us a little food." But we said, "We cannot go down. If our youngest brother is with us, then we will go down. We may not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us." And your servant, my father, said to us, "He knows that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me. And I said, surely he is torn to pieces. And I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my grave and the star to the grave. Now therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen, when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant our father, the sorrow to the grave." Your servant became surety to the lad to my father, saying, "If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my Lord, and let the lad grow up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I I see the evil that would come upon my father.
Okay, so this is really a great speech, isn't it? Before I start picking out what jumps out to me, what impresses you about what Judas says here? Or what do you find interesting in his speech?
Over honesty this time. He's not hiding much this time around. Everything is on the table.
Yeah, it's very,
Showing all his cards.
no deception, very honest. Yes.
Even told the part about surely he's been torn to pieces about Jacob.
Yeah.
Or Joseph, sorry.
Yeah, so Judah quotes his father about surely Joseph has been torn to pieces. Guess what? That's a new piece of information for Joseph. He doesn't know that his brothers had taken his coat dipped in goat's blood back to his father, and that his father assumed that he had been killed by a wild animal. He may have wondered all these years, I thought my father loved me. Why didn't he, send someone after me to try and find me in Egypt? Why is he just forsaken me? Well, now he has more of the picture, right? He knows Reuben tried to protect him. He knows his father thought he was dead. Okay, what else?
Well, it's impressive that he's offered his own life for Benjamin.
Yeah, very impressive. This isn't the Judah that we remember from chapter 38, is it? This is a very different man who is willing to lay down his life for his brother's sake. And not only for his brother's sake, but for his father's sake. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So Judah starts off rehearsing the conversation that the brothers had had with Joseph at the beginning. And one of the things he says, let's see, which verse is it here? He talks in verse 20 how we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age who is young. His brother is dead. Okay, that's the first time we've heard them use that directive language. Previously, they had said, and one brother is no more, which would lend one to think that they thought Joseph was dead. But here they just come out and directly state it. How must that have hit Joseph, when he heard that? And he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. So, again, he's recounting the speech here. And then he begins to recount what he said to his father and what his father said back to him. And that's where we got the point about surely Joseph is torn to pieces, etc. What is the one thing that Judah wants to get across here in this speech? To make Joseph understand why Benjamin needs to be set free.
He really thinks Jacob's gonna die from the
Right. He even uses words like the life of my father is bound up in the life of the lad, so that if Benjamin doesn't return, my father will die, right? Now, Judah says some words that are really shocking. We haven't read them before, but when he's quoting what Jacob says, notice verse 27. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. Ow. Okay, Dad, what about the other 10 of us? Do we count? Do our moms count? He only refers to Rachel as his wife, and she bore him 2 sons. But Judah says this, he repeats it without any animosity. Okay, now before, remember, the brothers had been extremely jealous of Joseph to the point where they did what they did to him. Here he's just sort of stating it matter-of-factly. And he's actually defending Jacob by saying his wife only bore him 2 sons. One's dead, Benjamin's all that's left, and he'll die if Benjamin doesn't return. This is his defense. It's pretty extraordinary. And then he goes on in verse 32 to say, your servant became surety for the lad, his guarantee that he would bring him back. And so then in 33, as you guys have said, Judah offers himself in the place of Benjamin. Okay. So when you stand back and look at the big picture of this speech, what does it tell you about Judah and the brothers as a whole?
They're taking responsibility for what they did.
Okay.
They definitely feel guilty about it.
Yeah. They've taken responsibility. They feel guilty. Shows a solidarity, doesn't it? Because they all returned. And then what about Judah himself? Because he's actually doing something that he isn't asking the others to do. Which is, he would stay in Benjamin's place and be Joseph's slave. That's quite a change for Judah, isn't it? And this is one of the things that is going to show why he is exalted to become the leader of the family. These kind of selfless qualities make him a great leader. Different from Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, who are his older brothers. So I have a quote here that I really like because I think it sums up very well the impact of this story. And it's a long quote, so I don't want you guys to write it down. Again, you can always get it on the internet if you want it. But I do want to chat about it. So it's a long quote, so you might not get it all first read through. So I want to chat about it a little bit. But here it is. Judah so feels for his father that he begs to sacrifice himself for a brother more loved than himself. That the sons of the hated wife should have come to terms with the father's attachment to Rachel, my wife, and her children is enough to promise an end to hostilities and a fresh start. But that Judah should adduce the father's favoritism as the ground for self-sacrifice is such an irresistible proof of filial devotion that it breaks down Joseph's last defenses. So you get what's going on there. It's not only that the sons of the hated wife, Leah, and I suppose the other concubines, have come to terms with the fact that Jacob only sees Rachel as his wife. That would be great enough. But that Judah is willing to sacrifice himself because the father's favorite is Benjamin. That's really something. It's not like Dad loves us all, and I'm willing to sacrifice myself for my brother that I love. It's like, no, Dad loves Benjamin the best, and he won't miss me near as much as Benjamin, so I'll give myself. Wow. It's pretty extraordinary. Judah passes a huge test here in this, and it says a lot about his character. So, thoughts, questions? All right, well, someone has suggested that even though the New Testament, to my knowledge, doesn't draw this out, that Judah is a type of Jesus in at least a few ways. See Luke shaking his head like, got some ideas, Luke?
Well, because he says that he will sacrifice himself for the sake of Benjamin, but then because it would be like his father's will for that to happen.
Yeah, very good, very good. So he is the first in Scripture to willingly offer his life for another. Secondly, he shows self-sacrificing love for a brother for the sake of the Father. And then we're going to find this one out, not in this story, but a few chapters later. The tribe of Judah receives the kingship. So as the ancestor of Jesus, he becomes a model of self-sacrificial love for a brother, for the sake of the Father. So that's pretty cool. Gives us hope that people can change too. You see what a scoundrel Judah was, chapters 37 and 38, and to allow the circumstances of life for God to work in those circumstances to soften him and mold him into the man that he became. It's pretty great. All right, are we through with chapter 44? Yeah, you're all happy? Okay. So chapter 45, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Someone in the court of Joseph caught this picture. I thought it was pretty cool. Actually get a picture of this reconciliation. All right, so let's read 1 through 15.
Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer. And he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. This famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here, not you. And he is the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace and the governor of all of Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me master over all the land of Egypt. So come down to me immediately. You can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me with all your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and everything you own. I will take care of you there, for there are still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise, you, your household, and all your animals will starve. Then Joseph added, look, you can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that I really am Joseph. Go tell my father of my honored position here in Egypt. Describe for him everything you have seen, and then bring my father here quickly. Weeping with joy, he embraced Benjamin, and Benjamin did the same. Then Joseph kissed each of his brothers and wept over them. And after that, they began talking freely with him.
Okay, good. So after a speech like that, we're told Joseph can't restrain himself any longer. And how many times now has Joseph wept over this whole situation? This is kind of a constant little motif through here, isn't it? Yeah, I think this is the 3rd time, right? So he declares who he is in verse 3. And I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of the brothers who never in a million years expected to hear these words come out of the Lord of Egypt's mouth, right? And then as soon as they realize it is Joseph, they're just terrified. They're like, we're in worse trouble than we thought we were when he was just the ruler of Egypt. Now it's our brother who we, did this terrible thing to. What's he going to do to us? But Joseph, to his credit, shows nothing but compassion for his brothers. And then verses 5 through 8 are key verses in the story. So I want to make you aware of that. There's actually two places in the story that really sort of sum up the story. One's in chapter 50, which we'll get to tomorrow night, but these verses here are very significant. Tell me what Joseph says here in your own words.
So forgives his brothers for what they did to him, and tells him how he's sort of seen God's hand in how his life unfolded to sort of save them.
Yeah, so he not only forgives them, but he talks like he really believes. He said, God sent me here. You know, he sent me here ahead of you to preserve life. And so he says again in verse 8, it was not you who sent me here, but God. So years later, after all of the suffering that Joseph went through, he could stand back and look back over those years of suffering, and he could see God's merciful hand in everything and say, wow, this is why these things happened, and this is why I'm here today. It's to save my family, okay? And so no animosity, no hatred toward the brothers, but seeing the hand of God in all of this. We don't always get the answer to the question why in our life when difficult things happen in our life. Sometimes we won't know until we see the Lord face to face. And we can either ask him then, or maybe we won't even care then, who knows? But sometimes, and I can say this, being the old man that I am, looking back over my life, sometimes you can look back over your life and you can say, I see why my life went the way it did. Some of it can be our own fault, by the way. We can make bad decisions. But you can look back over your life and you can see God's gracious hand. And the things that were painful or frightening at the time, you're like, you know what? God is good. And I can appreciate the fact of why that happened, how he brought me through it to mold me and make me the person that I am today. And to me, this is one of the greatest messages of this story, is getting that point across, just trusting the good hand of God, that in spite of evil that can happen to us, God will use it for good. So have you guys got any thoughts on these verses?
It's got to be such a relief for Joseph finally to get this load off his chest. He's been hiding for, we don't really know how long, I guess, but
Yeah.
probably at least a year.
Yeah, it must have been huge, just huge.
Finally, he gets to reconnect with his family. What a burden. He couldn't control himself. He was so excited.
Yeah,
So compassion, so much emotion overtaken.
yeah. You can see the good hand of God in all of that too. He probably never thought that he would be reconciled to his family at all, you know. But it was the famine, this bad thing, this famine that made that possible. So that's pretty cool. And then he tells the brothers to go back and get dad and everybody and bring them down, right? And he's excited for his father to know of the glory and the position that he has in Egypt. And then I like the touching scene in verses 14 and 15 where he and Benjamin, they hug and they cry together. But he doesn't leave it at that. It says that he kissed all of his brothers and wept over them. So again, we see this picture of reconciliation with all of the brothers and what they did. So you can see up here on the screen, I have Joseph is a type of Jesus. Again, this is something the New Testament doesn't just come out and use Joseph as a type of the Savior. But when you know the story of Jesus and you go back over the story of Joseph, you're like, wow, there are a lot of interesting foreshadowings of what Jesus would be like and what would happen to Jesus. So every year I like to ask the class to give me some things that they can think of as they look at the Joseph story, and then I'll put out a list of everything. And there are actually more things over the years than I have on this list, but I didn't want to fill up 20 slides, so we'll leave it with the list that we have here. But maybe you guys, every year I have someone come up with a new one. I'm like, wow, I never thought of that one before. So let's kind of get the ball rolling. Can you think of one? Yeah, Corinna.
He was rejected by his brothers, he was rejected by the Jews, and then the Egyptians accepted him as like their leader, like the Gentiles accept Jesus more than Jewish people.
Yeah, excellent. So rejected by his brothers, accepted by the Gentiles the way Jesus was. Okay, cool. What else?
What you meant for evil, God meant for good. That whole idea here we see in 45. Jesus being crucified, what the Jews meant for evil, God used to save the whole world.
Yeah.
That's probably the most obvious one.
Yeah, the crucifixion itself, which looks evil, God used for good. Good, what else?
This is like Joseph's third time, like really meeting with his brothers after the betrayal, and then he reveals like who he is to them, kind of like Jesus after 30 days, like really revealed his power after like the crucifixion.
Oh, okay. I like that one, Kristen. That might be a new one. Never heard it worded quite that way before. So, what do we have? 3 appearances of Joseph to his brothers, basically, and then the idea of 3 days and Jesus reveals himself. Yeah, okay, that's cool. I like that. What else? Anything else?
Was compassion and forgiveness for his brothers.
Yeah,
It's huge.
forgiving his brothers, which is what Jesus, of course, does for all of us. There's a few goodies that you're missing, that you'll be like, oh yeah, I should have thought of that one.
Disciples, and 12 brothers.
Oh, we got 12 disciples, and including Joseph, we have 12 brothers. So it's that's close correspondence. Yeah.
This could be a stretch, but he's tempted, and Jesus is like tempted, and they both say no to that.
Yeah, I actually think that's a good one. So Joseph resists temptation as Jesus resisted temptation. Yeah.
They both went to Egypt.
They both went to Egypt. There you go. I don't think that one's on my list either. Yeah, excellent. You got another one, Corinna?
It's more of like a parallel, because Jesus is referred to as the bread and the wine, and in the jail, the people who Joseph talks to are the cupbearer and the baker.
Uh-huh.
I don't know where I'm going with that, but I just
Yeah. Okay.
It reflects the story.
Yeah. I'll put some up for you guys, and feel free to jot as many of these down as you want to. You might need to know some of them at least for the final exam. So it's already been mentioned that he's rejected by his brothers. And I've tried to give us scriptures for the Joseph story. We know these things are true of Jesus as well. Here's one that no one got. Betrayed for money. Remember, they sell Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. He's given over to the Gentiles. So before he's accepted by the Egyptians, first of all, he's handed over to them. And he's abused by them, at least by Potiphar's wife, and then thrown in prison, of course. Now here's one that's easy to miss, because Of course, we know that Joseph doesn't really die, but as far as Joseph's father and brothers are concerned, Joseph is dead. Okay, and we have a couple of references to that in the story. And then we're told on a couple of occasions that he's in the pit. Now, the pit is also a word that is sometimes used to refer to the realm of the dead. So it's this idea, we've got Joseph who's died and he's in the pit, okay? Right, next, his suffering blesses many. So he ends up not only being a blessing to his family, but to the entire world by preparing for the famine and being able to dole out food then for everyone. Now this next one is one I thought you guys might get. He was exalted to rule at Pharaoh's right hand. Okay, just like the Lord, exalted to God's right hand. And one of you guys mentioned the next one. He forgives those who sought to harm him. The next one is similar to F, but slightly different. He brings salvation to the whole earth. It literally says at the end of chapter 41 that the whole earth came to Joseph to buy grain. So he was their savior. Otherwise, they would have died. Here's one that one of the students from years gone by came up with. His garment was taken from him. So you think of Jesus having his garments taken from him when he was crucified. That's Genesis 39. Sorry, I didn't have a scripture on that. It's somewhere around verses 10 to 12 or something, or 7 to 10 maybe, somewhere in there. But it's Genesis 39. He acts as an intercessor. So we haven't gotten to this point yet, but when Joseph brings his family down from Egypt, to Egypt, he's going to intercede for them with Pharaoh and help them get settled in the land and be given the best of the land. Okay. And then he's not recognized by his family. And you might remember that the Gospel of John, chapter 1, says that he came to his own did not receive him. You know, they didn't know who he was, that sort of thing. So there are others, and you guys mentioned a couple new ones tonight, which is great. So the more you meditate on this story, it's amazing how many parallels you can come up with, where Joseph's life has similarities with the life of Jesus. Anybody come up with another one? All right, well, we'll go ahead and take our next break, and we'll continue on in a little bit. Going along with Genesis 45, 5 through 8, I thought this was a great statement. And again, I don't expect you to write it down. I just wanted to read it to you. The depths of God's sovereignty are not demonstrated by his repression of our choices, that inevitably reveal our sinfulness and fallen self-will, but by the fact that there is no choice that we can make, however sinful or fallen, that can interfere with his plan. In fact, often enough, as in the case of Joseph, those choices end up furthering his plan. So I thought that's a really powerful statement. Again, it sort of balances this idea that God is sovereign and in control, but we still have the freedom to make the choices that we make. Certainly, when Joseph said, you didn't send me here, God sent me here, he didn't mean to say that God was behind the evil choices that his brothers had made, but that God used those evil choices to bring his plan to fruition. Okay, so you guys ready for the next part here? Verses 16 through 24. Sounds good.
Now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. So it pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your animals and depart, go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your household and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are commanded, do this, take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives. Bring your father and come, and do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. Then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. He gave to all of them to each man changes of garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And he sent to his father these things: 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. So he sent his brothers away, and they departed, and he said to them, see that you do not become troubled along the way.
Okay, thank you. So notice the generosity of Pharaoh and the goodwill. Obviously, Joseph was deeply loved for having saved Egypt and prepared them for this famine. So we're told not only did it please Pharaoh, but it pleased all of his servants. And Pharaoh says, come down, we're going to give you the best of the land. You don't even have to worry about bringing your supplies, although I think later we see that Jacob does bring his supplies. But he's basically saying, we'll provide everything. So gratitude is a good thing, when someone has been faithful to you and done acts of kindness toward you. It's good to be grateful, and to, when you have a chance to bless them, to bless them. I'm just struck, as you can tell by the slide here, that before they depart, Joseph gives all of them a change of garments, but he gives a little extra to Benjamin, 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. Again, I think at this point, it's clearly just expressing Joseph's love for his brother, his joy at seeing him again. And I think he knows by now that the brothers have passed the test of envying anybody. It sort of reminds me of the parable that Jesus tells also, where, remember the story of the parable of the vineyard, where the guys who come at the beginning of the day and they're paid the same amount as those who come at the 11th hour. And those who come early in the day start to grumble. And the master says, what are you grumbling about? Didn't we agree to this amount? And if I want to be generous with my money, don't I have the right to do that? So he says, why is your eye evil? Or in other words, why are you envious? So I think the brothers have learned that very important lesson. So Joseph gives the brothers a new garment for the one they violently took from him. So there's 2 words that we can follow through the story that shows us Joseph's ups and downs. What are those 2 words? House and clothes, right. Okay. So the brothers return and tell Jacob, and we get Jacob's response here.
One thing I liked in this, in my translation, Risey sends him off, he says, do not quarrel along the way.
Yeah.
That's a nice.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Did mean to point out there's some question as to how best to translate that word. Some commentators think that it could mean quarrel along the way. In other words, don't be blaming one another for what's happened. But the word is used more frequently to mean to be troubled or shaken or like afraid. Okay, so he's trying to communicate to them that there's no reason to be upset. Good.
Go ahead and read this.
Yes, please.
Okay. So they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan, to their father Jacob. And they told him, Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. And his heart became numb, for he did not believe them, when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them. And when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.
That's great. Again, so realistic, because you can imagine how stunned you would be if you thought someone was dead for the last 22 years. You not only find out they're alive, but they're like second most powerful man in all the world. So yeah, no wonder Jacob is stunned. What helps convince him? The wagons. So all the goods that have been sent, and the words which the brothers quote from Joseph as well. So yeah, it's cool. Verse 28, Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So Jacob is seeing the good hand of God when perhaps he thought God had taken his hand off of his life with what he thought was the death of Joseph and the loss of Simeon, and now he feared for the life of Benjamin. And as it turns out, he not only gets all of them back, he gets Joseph as well. Yeah, pretty cool. Anything else? Chapter 45. Nope. Okay, got to switch slideshows here. So pull up chapter 46. And so chapters 46 to 50 provide the conclusion to the story of Joseph and his brothers. So in Genesis 46, we're going to read the story of Jacob moving the family down to Egypt. Let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 7.
So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, but I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and their sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones and their lives in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to carry them. So they took their livestock and their goods which they had acquired in the land of Canaan and went to Egypt, Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his sons' sons, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt.
Okay. So as Jacob prepares to go, you may have noticed that throughout the story, every once in a while, he's called Israel. And people have often asked if there's a significance as to why sometimes he's called Israel and sometimes Jacob. Sometimes it's hard to know whether there's a significance, but in other occasions, like this one, it seems pretty clear that being called Israel here in verse 1 is this whole idea that the people of Israel are moving down to the land of Egypt.
Is it often when you have a passage where it's God talking to you as well? Because
Could be.
with
Yeah.
God giving the name, this reflects
That's worth checking out. Does it occur where God talks to him and calls him Israel? We do have, like, at the end of the last chapter, then Israel said, "It is enough, Joseph, my son is alive." But again, he goes on to say, "I will go down to see him before I die." So maybe that, again, that whole idea of Israel going down to Egypt. So places where it's definitely referring to the nation, and maybe places where God addresses him. That would definitely be worth checking out, Luke. Good suggestion. So we read in verse 1 that Jacob, or Israel, offers up sacrifices, and he's in Beersheba. Now, on our map of Israel, where is Beersheba? Remember? Sorry, I don't have a map to pop up for you guys.
Isn't it kind of central?
No.
Is it?
So you got two choices. Yes, it's considered the southernmost part of the land of Canaan. Okay. And of course, this is where Abraham and Isaac had spent time. So when Jacob leaves Beersheba and travels south, he's basically leaving the land of Canaan and then headed to the Sinai and on down into Egypt. So he stops here and he offers sacrifices. What do you suppose he does?
He wants to make sure that the Lord's hand is with him as he goes down to Egypt, instead of just doing his own thing.
Okay, this is good. Maybe he wants to check out with the Lord if this is what he should be doing. We might recall an earlier story where someone went down into Egypt during a famine and didn't check with the Lord. Abraham, or Abram as he was called then. Yeah, so this is good on Jacob's part, isn't it? Shows that he's looking for God's guidance. There could be another reason too. Maybe he wants to thank God that all of his kids are safe and that he's going to see Joseph. But God comes to him and appears to him and says what to him?
Don't be afraid to go to Egypt.
Right. Don't be afraid to go to Egypt. I will make of you a great nation there. Okay. Promise to Abraham, I will make of you a great nation. And then verse 4, I will go down with you to Egypt. So the Lord promises to accompany he and his family. And then he says, I will surely bring you up again. And what does it mean? Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. Yeah, exactly. So, the idea of person dying, maybe they die with their eyes open and the loved one closes the eyes. What a comforting word for Jacob to hear, that Joseph would put his hand on his eyes. So we're told that he arose with all of the family, all of the livestock, all of the goods that they had acquired. This would have been a huge entourage heading down to Egypt. Okay, all of the patriarchs' major moves were a result of divine revelation. So as we go back through Genesis, we can constantly see the hand of God moving the patriarchs. So for instance, when God first comes to Abram, he calls him out of Ur of the Chaldees to the land of Canaan. Sometimes the patriarchs go places that God doesn't reveal to them to go. We've already talked about Abram doing that and going to Egypt during the famine. Now, God doesn't come to Jacob and tell him to go to Padan Aram, but as he is fleeing there, God appears to him in a dream, tells him he'll be with him, and tells him that he'll bring him back to the land. Okay, so that's the story of the dream, Jacob's ladder, as we call it. And then God appears to Jacob in a dream and tells him to return to Canaan. So notice that quite a few of these have to do with the guidance of Jacob's life. And then here we read about God giving Jacob the permission to go down to Egypt. Now, not only had Abraham not checked with God during a famine of going down to Egypt, but who else experienced a famine in their time? And God came to them with a word. Remember? Isaac, and what was the word?
He's told to stay there and God would bless him.
He was told to stay in Canaan and that God would bless him. So that's why I didn't put Isaac on the list, because he doesn't actually leave Canaan. Isaac stays in Canaan all of his life. But he does have this word from God not to leave. So we could include it in that sense, that God also directed Isaac, and Isaac was obedient to it. Okay, anything else in verses 1 through 7 you want to chat about? Well, in 8 through 27, we get a genealogy. Yay! Is it your turn? Yay, Corinna! All right. Yeah, and of course, we're used to the 12 sons of Jacob, but we're going to get more than that in this list, aren't we? So, yeah, take a deep breath and go for it.
These are the names of the sons of Israel, Jacob and his descendants who went to Egypt. Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, the sons of Reuben, Hanoch, Pallu, Hezron, and Carmi, the sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Zomin, Gad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman, the sons of Levi, Gershon, Mohak, and Merari, the sons of Judah, Onan, Sheba, Perez, and Zerah. But and Onan had died in the land of Canaan. The sons of Perez, Hezron, and Hamul. The sons of Issachar, Tola, Pua, Jessup, and Shimon. The sons of Zebulun, Zered, Elon, and Jalib. These are the sons Leah bore to Jacob in Padan Aram, besides his daughter Dinah. These sons and daughters of his were 33 in all. The sons of Gad, Zebon, Haggai, Shimei, Ezbon, Uri, Arandu, and Ari, Aralad. The sons of Asher, Imnah, Ishra, Izvi, and Barah. Their sister was Sarah. The sons of Barai, Heber, and Malachah. These were the children born to Jacob by Zilpah, who Laban had given to his daughter Leah, 16 in all. The sons of Jacob's wife Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. In Egypt, Manasseh and Ephraim were born to Joseph by Asnath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. The sons of Benjamin, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Korah, Nam, Eve, Rosh, Mopin, Happen, and Ard. These are the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 in all. The son of Dan, Hashum. The sons of Naphtali, Jeziel, Beni, Jezer, and Shilom. These were the sons born to Jacob by Bilhah, whom Laban had given to his daughter Rachel, 7 in all. All those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those who were his direct descendants, not counting his sons' wives, numbered 66 persons. With the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family which went to Egypt were 70 in all.
Okay, thank you for working your way through that list. I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide, because here we have this list laid out for us according to each of the sons of Jacob, showing all the names that Corinna just read for us. So this is a different list from what we've seen before. First of all, we have a lot of names of people that we hadn't read before, but also it's given in a different order. Whose children are given first? Hmm? Liz, right? And then who's second? Zilpah, who is,
Leah's servant.
yeah, Leah's servant, you're right. And then next, Rachel, and finally, Bilhah, Rachel's concubine. Okay, so Leah, Zilpah, Rachel, Bilhah. Different order. So not the order of the births, but a different order based on numbers. Who has the most children according to this list? Leah does, right? And when you combine the number of her descendants with the number of Zilpah's, 33 and 16, if my math is good, that's 49, right? So they have the most. And notice that Leah's is almost twice what Zilpah's is, 33, 16. And then we have Rachel, and how many descendants does she have according to the list? 14. And how many does her servant have? 7, half that many. So add 21 to 49 and you come up with 70, right? So that's kind of interesting. And it's interesting that Rachel has 14, which is 2 times 7. And Rachel's maid has 7. You know, that good old number 7 that we've seen throughout the book of Genesis and what it stands for. But what's the story with Leah's descendants? Even though if we add up the numbers here, there's 70. There's a few of Leah's descendants that don't actually go down into Egypt, right? Who are those? Because we read a story earlier. And Onan, right? Don't make it, right? Struck down by the Lord, okay? Now, one of the other things that's interesting as you look at the list is sometimes grandsons are mentioned, right? And sometimes they're not. So with Judah, you get a couple of Perez's grandsons, or, well, they'd be his sons, Judah's grandsons. And also with Asher, a similar kind of thing. How many women are mentioned here in the genealogy? 2. Yeah, Dinah, and then if you look under Asher's genealogy, you can see her name in red, Sarah, okay? And so when you really start to total up the numbers, there's different ways to come up with the figure 70. Really, there's 76 people mentioned here, total. And none of the wives are mentioned, except for Joseph's wife, but she isn't counted in the 70 because she's Egyptian. She's already in Egypt. So, in other words, the number 70 then is what? It's symbolic. It's the perfect number, okay? And what does that number 70 remind you of earlier in Genesis? I'm hoping it reminds you of something. We saw 70 of something else earlier. Well, we did have that. That's true. Yeah, but I'm thinking more in terms of a genealogy. Hint, hint. The map of nations. There were 70 nations listed. So I think that there is an intentional comparison here between the 70 nations that represent the world. And even in that list, we talked about how the number is symbolic. But we have the 70 nations, and now we have the 70 descendants of Israel going down into Egypt. So remember that the promise given to Abram was that he would be a blessing to all the families of the earth, right? And so the family of Jacob is now going down to Egypt so that they can grow into this nation and become this nation that is then supposed to bless the other nations of the earth. So I do believe that that's part of the significance there of the number 70. To further illustrate this, if you look at the sons of Benjamin, there's 10 sons listed. Now, someone was asking earlier, how old would Benjamin have been when Joseph was taken away? And we were saying 3, 4, something like that. So if you add 22 years to the time they're apart, that makes Benjamin 25 or 26. He didn't have 10 sons by that point. So it's including sons that had to have been born after they were already in Canaan. Again, this is all about helping to make this number 70. Because it's, in other words, there's something more important going on here than just giving us the list of descendants, but it's to focus on this number, which recalls the number from earlier in Genesis about the nations of the world.
Luke say he could have had 10 sons by that point.
Sorry?
He could have had 10 sons by that point, because you don't know how many, if he had more than one wife.
Well, that's true. If he had more than,
Jacob, he had 10 sons in about 6 years.
yeah, that is a good point. We can't rule that out. We don't know how many wives Benjamin had. Okay, so any questions on the genealogy here or on this slide that we have up? Okay. Before we move on in the text, I just want to show you guys a few maps and photos of the area that we're going to be reading about in the text. So this is obviously a picture of Egypt. And you can see the Nile Delta area is this really lush green area. And this is where the Nile River is split into different tributaries or headwaters or whatever they are. And so it's a very lush, fertile area. And this is the area known as Goshen, where the Israelites are going to settle. If you look over toward the right-hand side, not all the way to the right, but do you see the cities of Tanis and Avaris? The city of Avaris has been extensively excavated for the last 30 to 40 years. And many Bible scholars are convinced that this is the city where Jacob was settled and his family was settled. There is a lot of very, very interesting evidence here. We do know they were a group of people from Canaan, okay? And I won't go into all of the interesting details because we don't have the time for it in this class. But I'm going to show you a few other slides related to this. All of these slides, by the way, come from a movie called Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus. And have any of you guys ever seen that movie? Oh, you really need to see that movie. There's actually 4 movies now called Patterns of Evidence, and they all deal with different aspects of the Exodus. But the first one is called Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus. We're going to read here in the story how Jacob's family was settled in the land of Ramesses. Now, this name comes from later in Egyptian history. This area is called Ramses after the famous pharaoh Ramses II, but Ramses II doesn't rule until the 1200s BC. We're still back in the 1800s. So this is another example of a name where the city name has been updated for contemporary readers so that they know, because it's no longer called the previous name, it's called Ramses. What we know is that the city called Ramses, if you dig underneath it, you find the city of Avaris, which is the city, as I said, many believe is the city of Jacob and his family, okay? One of the things they've discovered there is a palace. This is interesting because Joseph was a pretty high up guy. He might have lived in a palace in this area. Now, one of the things the film points out, I don't know if this is significant or not, but it does point out that there's 12 pillars to this palace. So whether that's coincidence or whether that's significant, I don't know. However, one of the things they've discovered are 12 tombs. And one of these tombs is a very large tomb that you can see in the foreground. It's kind of in a pyramid shape. So Jacob had how many sons? 12. And of course, Jacob wasn't buried here, right? He's taken back to Canaan. So 12 graves is pretty interesting, and one very special tomb. And in that tomb, it was empty, but they found a statue. Now, they only found a portion of the statue. So this is an artistic conception of what the whole statue would have looked like, okay? Or what the top half of it would have looked like. And what they know from this is that the way this man is dressed is that he was from Canaan. They can tell by the clothing and everything. They can also tell that he's a royal figure. And so some believe that they've actually found part of what may have been the statue of Joseph, and that this might have been Joseph's tomb. Now, no coffin or bones are found there, and why is that? That's right. When Moses and the people left, they took the bones of Joseph with them. So again, this is a fascinating film that I would recommend for all you guys to see. It's called Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus, okay? A lot of interesting evidence. So anyway, you have an idea now of the area where Israel is going to settle, and that's what we're about to read about, okay? And that's why I wanted to show you these things. So actually, we're going to wait till tomorrow night, though, because we don't want to jump into chapter 47 right now. We've done a good job covering 5 chapters. I think that's pretty much enough. We missed the last section, though, didn't we? Yeah, I kind of jumped. Oh, I know what happened because I jumped ahead to show you guys that slide with the descendants. I forgot to go back. And okay, so be patient with me, and I'm going to flip back here. And we'll get the end of this slide back up. And we will finish chapter 46, and then we'll be through. Yeah, you thought you were going to get out of it. Okay, let's see. Here we go, verses 28 to 34, and then we will be finished.
Then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. He presented himself to and fell on his neck and wept on his neck with violence. And Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive." And Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock, and they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. So it shall be, when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? And you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock, and even to now. Both me and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians."
Okay. Yeah, we don't want to miss this. This is the reunion of Joseph and Jacob. So notice in verse 28, we're told they come to the land of Goshen, and we've seen where that is on the map. And Joseph makes ready his chariot. What an impressive way to meet Dad, huh? Coming up in his chariot. And just like with the brothers, he fell on his neck, and they wept on his neck for a good while. I'll bet that was a sweet reunion. Now, I really like verse 30. Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive." Talk to me about seeing faces in the Jacob story. Where have we seen that before? Peniel, which means face of God. And Jacob said, "I've seen God face to face, yet I didn't die." What else?
Leah, not seeing her face.
Not seeing Leah's face. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. It's not stated that way in the text, but clearly he didn't. Who else's face did he see? He made a big deal out of it in the story. Esau's face, remember? Seeing your face as if I had seen the face of God, right? And that big wordplay in chapter 32 about, I'm sending this present to cover his face. It goes before my face. I forget exactly how it goes, but so that he might lift up my face and so on. But 4 different uses of the word face. So here, Jacob, or Israel as he's called, gets to see Joseph's face. What a blessing for him. And then Joseph acts as intercessor here in verse 31, just basically to tell the family proper protocol and what they should say in addressing Pharaoh so that they can be given the land that they'll need for their flocks and their herds. Okay? So, now, got anything else? You're like, no way, I want to get out of here. Okay, so we'll pick up with chapter 47. Yeah. You'd be hated, you know, if you did that. Yeah, so tomorrow night we'll finish Genesis 47 through 50. Yeah.